so maps tell us stories, be it a sort of a subway map or a trail map. And I think we can sort of see, so these two maps I've got up here, one map on the left is where the people are, and the map on the right is where the stresses are, right? And the thing about maps is they can really sort of reorientate our ideas and how we sort of see the place. What we don't see here, obviously, is the provinces and the states. We don't see where the roads are. So it just really sort of focuses in on certain things. That's what the maps do. They're either layers or no layers. They allow us to sort of really focus in on new ideas and sort of reorientate ourselves on that same piece of land that we may have looked at a zillion times. We're seeing it in a different sort of way. So I wanted to use maps to also to sort of tell a story or tell a different kind of story. So I sort of work in this, communications, cultural studies environment a little bit, and the kind of work I do talks about critical tensions, right? And this is sort of the roots of the project, where I see there's these things going on that I'm trying to make sense of. And so this is kind of like where the project is sort of coming out. So on the one hand, we live in this sort of information age, Wikipedia, internet, Google searches, milliseconds away, and everything's connected. Yet on my travels and my work in this area around mapping, what I see here is a lot of confusion around what is the water. If the water is clear, does that mean it's clean? Or who takes care of the water? Or where does my drinking water come from? Where is the intake source? And what's actually in the water? So a lot of confusion, and also a lot of disconnection between neighbors or who may be facing similar issues. Or, before working on this project, I really had no idea where Cleveland was. Who here has a really clear idea where Cleveland is? All right, we share Lake Ontario with obviously our American neighbors, and Cleveland is on Lake Erie, but just the idea of connectivity as well, and sort of like, we're actually very disconnected from our watersheds and from each other, and the kind of ways in which water is sort of looked at, managed, whatever. So that's one of the critical tension I have. Another one is the idea of like corporations have rights to Dasani and Coke and Pepsi are in region appeal, capping, bottling, selling water to us, right? Often these come with sort of water rights, free speech rights, all these sort of personhood rights that corporations have to do, mining or manufacturing, industrialism, kind of area. And so, but nature. What about that river or that lake or that watershed? Does that have a right to exist? There's been some examples with Bolivia and sorry, those nuts are. You may have not heard of the country of Bolivia, sort of including rights of Mother Earth in the Constitution. And even Ecuador, sort of including rights to water and to rivers as well. And so we're beginning to see the rise of the sort of green governance structures and some giving some rights to nature. I don't think Stephen Harper is going to be on board yet, but we sort of see this sort of like pick up, right? So this is also, we have rights for some and rights for these like corporate entities and no rights for nature. We have this really idea that progress is okay. It means progress is polluting the water and then investing in all kinds of high-tech ways to clean it up again, right? Massive amounts of energy and resources. But our story of progress right now doesn't give any sort of support for or incentives for prevention, protection, or even enhancement. So this story of progress is also making certain things happen, not other things. We have a system in which benefits the few. A lot of this, in my opinion, our current water system is very much a sort of a risk management sort of paradigm, right? And those risks are taken by people who don't live in the area or who live far away or live upstream. We'll get to that in a second. But who's impacted by these things? We can talk about First Nations and sort of bottled water advisories. We can talk about the native community of how do you pronounce it? Amishwang near Sarnia, who have totally torn off their birth rates 2 to 1, female to male. And so we can talk about environmental justice and sort of how different water issues are affecting different communities, and the more marginal, more so. So again, risk by the few, impacts and negatives for the many. we've had about a good 50-year run of the current system, in my opinion, of water management practices and policies, agreements, both local and sort of continental. But I don't think we can sort of survive all this progress we're getting. The lakes have never been in worse shape, and yet we've never had as many organizations sort of working on them. So what's that famous quote? You know, the same kind of thinking that solve the problem is not going to solve it, right? And so there's another sort of critical tension for me as well. And again, this idea that when ecology is a circle, there's no such thing as downstream. So when I was cycling around Lake Ontario, which we'll talk about a bit later, you know, they have these zones for source water protection. And if you're in this zone, you got to be extra careful, like not to dump your gasoline down the river or something like that, because within 24 hours, that's going to go right into the tap water. And yeah, they have their little zone to protect their source drinking water. But then what about downstream? What about the communities sort of downstream? And so we have a very, again, risk management sort of compartmentalized system of looking at an ecosystem, which is basically a circle. So no one is, we're all downstream, eventually. If the beluga whales, some of the most polluted toxic animals on this earth, are the very end of this long process of water contamination to the Great Lakes, you know, birds and fish, then those birds go to the Arctic and there you go, right? And so we can start seeing with issues of climate change how local actions can affect sort of global conditions. So there's no such thing as downstream. And lastly, this is one of the tensions I want to talk about, especially in conversation mode, is that it's one thing to create a collaborative map in which everyone can have a voice, and it's another thing to say, well, how do people actually use it? What's their motivation for using it? Everyone, you can create a space, but you don't know who's still going to come. The technology is there, but the literacies, the buy-in, the shared needs, how do you, that's not technology, that's more of a sort of pedagogy, practice, and invitation. So that's that. Okay, the story so far around the Great Lakes Commons map. How many people here have actually have seen the website? About a half of you? Which is fine, I'm going to go do a quick overview. So the story so far is that, you know, my background is sort of media studies, environmental studies, education, right? And I was really inspired by the work of Council of Canadians and a group called On the Commons. They put out this is like you get the PDF, this is the PDF version. And their document, our Great Lakes Commons, a people's plan to protect the Great Lakes, or whatever. And for me, it was just a really integration of a mapping project would be a really good way to make this document a bit more alive. And so I'm also interested in cycling, and so I combine, you know, this idea, need legs. So we talk about this idea like, you know, you make the road by walking, right? So before you put in the infrastructure or the hard wiring it, you let people use the space to see how they use it, you know? And you sort of figure it out as you go based on the interactions and the patterns that arise. And so for me, the cycling around Lake Ontario was a way for me to, okay, if I'm gonna look at these Great Lakes, like what's my experience with them? Do I know, have I been there, have I experienced? What is my relationship? And talk to people along the way. And so last May, I sort of launched the Great Lakes Commons map in conjunction with a talking tour that the Council of Canadians was doing as well, and all around the Great Lakes, looking at the Great Lakes as a commons. But I wanted to do something, I wanted to add to that project and say, well, how can this thing have legs? How can we build in participation? So the site's goal is to build capacity amongst the various players, and there are lots of different various players, formal and informal, around the Great Lakes as a whole. So building the capacity of those groups to coordinate and to learn, to share, and to even advocate for change, but also to start illustrating what this commons ethic is. It's really easy in some ways to talk about the commons as this shared thing, I'll get to that. But how is it actually practiced on a daily level? How do you talk about that to almost anybody in the street? You know, just on the way over here today, I was like, I guess I have my certain lens on, and I see like, you know, dog walkers in a park, right? And there's certain etiquette, you know, when your dog poops, you sort of pick it up, and nobody owns that park, right? Everyone needs to still take care of it in little ways. Like, oh, that's an example of like an everyday use of the commons. Or I'm on the bus, and it's getting packed and whatever, and people are sort of letting the old man sit down, and they're moving around. So we have, again, this sort of informal shared space in which we negotiate how things get done. right? And so there's no real tragedy here. I think that in a second. There are all these ways in which we negotiate and we share space that nobody really owns. And so I want to really illustrate what that commons ethic is and celebrate it. And try to take it and I'll just scale it up to a lake or even an ecosystem sort of basis. So I mentioned this sort of document, and there's one key quote near the end of the document that I wish I would have paid more attention to back in May, but I just looked at it again the other day, and it really sums up what I'm trying to do with the Great Lakes Commons Map, and that's this. Our organizational goal is to get the communities around the Great Lakes, as well as the myriad of existing community and environmental groups, to become better linked to one another through the connecting narrative of a commons discourse. We need to create a vocabulary to connect the many millions of people who are not experts on the details of the environmental threats to the Great Lakes, but who care about them and are ready to feel ownership of them. So again, this is within a larger sort of organizational sort of structure and community of people working on this issue. The Commons Map is part of that. I'll do a quick sort of like, just show like, so here's the sort of main, so it's like a collaborative mapping, sort of digital storytelling, commons ethic kind of thing. And I want to show you two of the reports that are sort of on it. So this is the main sort of interface. And this is going to go to, so we can see it here as well, so on the internet now. And so it's an invitation and our OpenStreetMap. So there's Google Map, which is very proprietary, and OpenStreetMap, which is sort of open source, made by people and updated by people as well, with instructions on how to use it, and then the sort of the reports by the most recent sort of thing. The reports are basically, they use the word reports because it sort of comes from this sort of crisis mapping. This was called maptivism. Ushigi's community has years of history going to either election zones with conflict or after natural disasters and using mapping and cell phones and sort of this crowdsourcing of ideas and putting on a map in those sort of more crisis sort of contexts. Well, because we're in a sort of slow-moving crisis for the Great Lakes, so they use the word of reports. And so the reports are basically a way to, well, I did a report for today. You basically say, something's going on, right? So where is it, and what is it? So here are the basic features of any given report would be obviously the map, which you could like blow up or whatever. Description, so you have text, you could write poetry, you could have a report, paragraphs, whatever. You could have links into other sites, so your own community, your own group's website or whatever. One or multiple photographs and whatever. And it even has like a bit of a blog format. So I'm going to responded here. Cool. So it's not just one person saying this is something. You have someone can then reply to that. So the site so far has over 50 sort of reports that are sort of in this sort of blog format. I was going to show you one report in particular that puts it in more context around the cycling and the traveling and whatever. And so again, the other major parts, and obviously there's the about, which describes what I'm doing today, advice on how to make a nice report, so really giving people the sort of the context, like how to really present your message and really not just put up your event, but how does this event connect to the larger Great Lakes or to the idea of the commons, right? And I can talk about categories in a second. So I'll just show you this quick video. It's like 2 minutes. Again, it's another report. So you basically the thumbnail of the video is embedded within the report, and you can even sort of okay, so this is one video I shot. I mean, in terms of the mobile nature of it all, this is sort of all done on a smartphone, you know, edited, uploaded, titled. There's even ones with narration or background music. There's various sort of ways you can sort of do it. It's really trying to make it like, it's always low tech. You don't have to carry around all this sort of gear. And when you're talking to somebody, you can. It's not like a big sort of device. People are pretty relaxed when they sort of talk to you. This first video is just this idea of like how do we see water, and this is sort of I did this in Kingston. So each of the videos in some way is a representation of, either the person you're talking to, or in this case, it's my own sort of reflections, but also an invitation for the viewer to either comment on this or to create their own, right? And so again, not all things are coming into the data packets of like, this is the number of pollutants in the water, or this is a scientific, like what the map is trying to do, those things are sort of in many ways already out there. It's really trying to give some context to the text. Actually, I went from Toronto to Hamilton to Kitchener for a wedding and back down. So I went along the Grand River for a while. Everyone know where the Grand River dumps into? Dumps into Lake Erie. And met this woman. They're really special. Again, it's a 2-minute video on all done like in the field, while traveling, and on an iPhone. So met this woman and her daughter down by the river. And I wanted to talk to her about her connection with that.
Our family has been coming here now for 3 generations. And it began with me, my daughter, and now my grandchild, Paige. And this is our secret spot. And when we want to talk to our children, it's a place with the perfect trees. It's a beautiful setting. And the thing that upsets us the most is what people do to damage this beautiful site. And that they choose to dump their garbage, their lawn cuttings, and anything else in this area. And it prevents the next generations that are coming after Paige and Paige's children from really enjoying this site. And my wish is that where there is access to the Grand River, that there is some types of discipline, strong disciplines, put on people so that they can't dump and continue the pollution. As a young child, I grew up on the Grand River with my grandmother, and there's a lot of memories here, and I would like those memories to continue for all the generations to come. But if people in industry continue to do the same thing that they've done for the last 50 years of my life, it's not going to be here in the next 50 years for the generations that follow. And with that manifest, I think that I've given you true justice. And this is June the 18th, and me and your granddaughter Paige are working on a major contract job across the river. And one day, Miss Paige, with her camera, will be able to see how those people landscape down towards the Grand, so that their grandchildren can enjoy the Grand River the same way as we have.
Again, the invitation, the sort of story. Again, a couple of minutes long, not like a huge sort of documentary. So as I went around Lake Ontario, a friend of mine came, like was in the first video, talking to people about what they care about, what do they know, sort of trying to live that idea of shared knowledge. Okay. So there's sort of 4 major parts to this project, and I've talked about them indirectly sort of already. I'm just going to go into a bit of depth for each one, and then I have an offer sort of for you. Right? So there's the idea of the open source sort of Ushahidi, OpenStreetMap. There's this idea of the commons, all the things that we sort of share. There's the water issues that the stress map sort of showed, that we may be aware of even more firsthand. Then there's sort of question mark, right? How do you do it? I know the what is the map, the technology. The why is the commons and the water. The how, right? That's what I'm sort of like would love to sort of have a discussion about. So quickly on each of those. So far, there's over 50 reports on the website. We've had over 2,000 unique visitors, 10,000 page views. For those that don't know, as I mentioned a little bit, Ushahidi is open source collaborative mapping software. It's been in the news a little bit on CBC recently, if you're listening to CBC. There is a project called HarassMap, which is working out of Egypt, and it is a way for both men and women to report any sort of signs or experiences of sexual harassment in its various forms, and to basically have that sort of geotagged to the locations so that individuals and even you look for patterns of neighborhoods or places. So trying to create more accountability and sort of again share knowledge. So the current had her on the other day, and she was on Spark today. Yeah. So apparently, so Heather Lesson, who's like the community development person for Ujihidi, lives in Toronto, and she will only come today. She's got back out of the country yesterday, and apparently she mentioned this map on Spark as well. So she emailed me saying, really got cut out. Who knows? So that's what Ujihidi is in some ways, and they have like a lot of support. It's not as big as like, let's say like WordPress, other sort of open source online platforms, but a growing community of people who can use. You can use these maps for any purpose. We can talk about that afterwards as well. If you want to map, favorite dangerous places, water stories, whatever. There's even a tool where you can like draw a line or a polygon, so we can map out sort of line 9, which is a Tarsan's sort of project. Put it on the map. Let people sort of engage with it, add their questions.
This downloadable standalone piece.
There's both actually. We have a web version called Crowd Map, where you can basically have a map going in 10 minutes, right? And then you also can do a full install, which is the Ushikidi sort of platform where you can customize it a bit more as well. Again, user-generated OpenStreetMap, mobile, ready. Talked about text, video, sort of photo formats.
You said there's 50 uploaded. So how many of those are yours?
Good question.
Yeah.
So I voted about a good 30 are mine. And that's one of my big question marks. Well, yeah, and the quality of the other ones are a bit scattered, whatever. So, but I want to get to the idea of like inclusion and participation and really fostering that. Because I've been in contact with people and they're like, oh yeah, I will post one, but getting people to actually post is a huge actual hurdle. So I want to address that head on.
And verification is a real hurdle too. You have to verify that the things are accurate.
Yeah, that's the beauty of doing this more story-based system, that you don't really have to verify someone's story. But if you are working in a more of a data sort of report, then yeah, in some ways, Wikipedia has the same sort of challenge. And if somebody posts something about a nuclear reactor or something specific about a chemical in the water, who verifies it? Does the community verify it? Is it crowdsourced as well? Yeah. Okay, and I'm about to go blog as well. So the second part is this idea of the water issues, which I'll go through very quickly. Obviously, we talked about volume. Great Lakes are the world's largest sort of system of freshwater anywhere. 40 million people live in the Great Lakes sort of basin, as well as like 3,500 other species. And what I thought was really interesting is like about 99% of the water in the Great Lakes was left there by the glaciers when they retreated. And so I think only 1% is naturally replenished through, I guess, the natural water cycle, right? So we can talk a lot about that as well later. It takes about 350 years for water to completely move through the whole watershed. So basically those beluga whales that are in St. Lawrence right now, they're ingesting water in theory, like when there was some contact to North America, basically by the Europeans, right? So I think it really just puts things in perspective around when we're affecting the waters, how long is this going to last? And just how slow some of these systems sort of operate. The impacts are lengthy, and we can do a whole afternoon just on these, but I'll just list them quickly. We obviously have thermal, where we're heating up the waters either by using it as a coolant for nuclear reactors, or we also have global warming, heating up the waters. We have algae growth, we have sewage, we have invasive species that are threatening ecosystems, chemical cocktail of industrial solvents and pharmaceuticals that we have no idea what's in there. It's a really good documentary called Water Life, that some of you may have seen. And basically, Environment Canada can't even look for certain chemicals because they don't know they exist. And they don't know that because the drug companies don't tell them because it's proprietary information. So all these drugs in your pharmacy, whenever you get a prescription, the doctor says, don't take this drug with those other 10 drugs because it could be a reaction. Well, all those other 10 drugs are in your water to a smaller degree, but they're there. But we don't even know what they are. We don't know how they mix together, how they change over time. There's hotspots. There's like areas of concern. There's like sort of 43. We cleaned up a couple of hotspots. In 25 years, we cleaned up about 5 hotspots here out of like 45. And so that just shows you in some ways sort of how slow, even we're sort of like protecting these lakes to death in some ways. And then energy. We've got lots of intersections with water in terms of nuclear, burying wastes, Lake Huron areas. We've got thermal cooling of nuclear power plants that need water. We have potential of fracking in Ontario already going on with Lake Erie on the American side, Ohio. And we have obviously tar sands impacts already in Lake St. Clair and Sarnia area, and potentially with Line 9 coming across southern Ontario as well. So energy is a huge factor when it comes to sort of water issues. Basically, all these are sort of part of this development, this sort of model. Governance, hundreds of government and citizen organizations, 2 provinces, 9 states, hundreds of municipalities, many First Nations as well, reserves. So we have a lot of players, each responsible for different aspects of this watershed. I've already talked about environmental justice a little bit in terms of who risks, and who pays, and who benefits. And then lastly, water is a real intersection, regardless if you're interested in water in particular firsthand, but obviously farming, transportation, urbanism, urban environments, energy, recreation, industry, democracy, and the idea of the global, right? That's the intersection between the local and the global. So global warming or global energy consumption, but also we can learn a lot about what the scarcity of water by going to less water abundant countries and seeing water privatization or water pollution happening there as well, and how those same companies are eyeing up Canada for privatizing Canada's water systems as well. So obviously the global economy in terms of austerity and the role of governments or the power of governments and the power of governments to sort of resist privatization of our water systems. So that's the sort of the goal. The commons ethic, again, I got another 15 minutes and then we're going to be done with it. There's a couple of aspects. How many people here are pretty fluent in the commons jargon, ethic kind of stuff? Again, I mentioned the public park or the private bus, and so in many ways we all intersect with the commons on a daily basis. But you thinking about it in terms of a governance structure for the Great Lakes, whoa, that's like, slow it down there, Paul. So there, obviously, it's this idea that the things that we share and we all benefit from that nobody in particular owns, right? So we can talk about the internet, human languages, seeds, the airwaves, parks, customs, blood banks. What else could be added there? You can add in lots of public parks, libraries, public services, right? But we can see the internet's being privatized, GMO seeds in Monsanto or proprietary. The airwaves. Airwaves are corporatized for the most part. Who owns the airwaves? But that's the idea of it. We're really good at having private property rights, but we don't really have a robust system of collective property rights. And we're seeing the tragedy of that right now. I've talked about nature's rights already as well. And so the tragedy is not of the commons, the tragedy is the enclosure of the commons. And the assumption was, it's all been debunked, but still the notion is there, that if you just leave the commons open, it's going to be destroyed. And so the solution is to compartmentalize it, sell it off. That way the owner of that commons has a vested interest in taking care of it. But we've seen that paradigm doesn't really work either, because once you can own a little bit of upstream, you do whatever you want, and then it's going to go downstream. We were in Prince Edward County, living with some farmers for a bit, and he was trying to do organic farming. But the person on his watershed was not doing organic farming. Well, guess what, right? And so private property rights don't work either. And so what we need is not just this free-for-all, do what you like, but we need a system of commons governance that can coordinate collective resources. Nature is not a resource, it's the idea of a gift. We know you birth, basically, I'm really reading Charles Eisenstein's days, Sacred Economics, but basically life is a gift, and so then once you're able to sort of feed yourself and walk around, what are you going to sort of give back? What's your gratitude? What's your sign of gratitude? So water would be also a gift. I think one of my questions I would do in a workshop with water mapping would be, what do you give back to the water? How do you show how grateful you are for this gift of life? You didn't create water. So obviously the core question is like, who owns water, and if we consider the uses, the volumes of water that industry uses, or how water is being polluted, you would think that, oh, that person feels like they own that water. You know, we find it perfectly legal to take water, use it, and put it back dirtier or warmer than when you found it. Does that make sense? Would that work in a public park and with dogs within a family? If someone did that, took something, polluted it and put it back, and then it was considered normal. So again, we have these idea of ownership. So the enclosures are here, they're coming. We've got water privatization happening in the United States, a lot of countries in the world. And the biggest example in Canada would be bottled water. Bottled water is a form of enclosure of the commons. It is commodifying and privatizing a shared resource, 10,000 times the cost of what it actually comes out of your tap for, with huge amounts of waste, and in many ways draining the sort of the groundwater and public sources without our permission, without our real knowledge of what's going on here, right? So the enclosure is a huge threat. Talked about the right to pollute. This idea of the free riders in this system, in many ways, are private interests that are using public water for private gain. So we call that a free rider in the commons network. And the difference between price and cost. So obviously, the price that you pay for a watermelon or strawberries from California, the cost of that in terms of the virtual water impact or the environmental impacts are massive. There's the estimate that if gasoline, for instance, was to include the full price of its air, water, and all the rest of it damage, it'd be about $15 a gallon for gasoline, right? So in the commons ethic, there is no externalities. There is no other person to pick up the price, right? Right now, we have the private gain, public picks up the cost of that. So we're really stressing on this idea of collective responsibilities and collective rights. Not easy stuff. But how? So I've got a couple of ideas on this, and then I'll sort of open it up to the floor. So I talked about the what, that is the sort of open source technologies that can do little blogs, maps, location-based, photo, video, all the rest of it. Great, like bioregional perspective. Let's look at the Great Lakes in a different sort of way, because as we can use maps to help us see things differently. But how? How are we going to do this? So there's always this idea of finding the vocabulary. So this is where, again, text meets the context. So meeting somebody on the streets or in a watershed and saying, hey, what do you think of this water commons thing? And whatever, you're going to probably get a blank look, right? So how can we start using the commons language when we're talking about water or any sort of public space and start to sort of share those experiences? And then once we can name it, then we can really then fight for it. And in many ways, the commons is if we talk about public services in this city or in this country, they're under attack. Look at public spaces under attack, right? And I think in one way, what links all these things together is that they're all part of the commons, and yet we're all fighting these different fights regarding it. Let's say, private garbage pickup, or the dirty beach down the road, or my Rogers bill, or the library hours. Here we are, all fragmented around all these different threats. Roads. Who are roads for? We put a bike lane on that road. The shared space of these common resources that we all sort of pay for and we can all benefit from. How are they being degraded? How are they being sort of used? So finding the vocabulary to talk about water in the same way. I've talked about this, that there's no one person, not even Maud Barlow, who helped write this sort of document here or whatever, can know as much about what's going on in the Great Lakes as the 40 million people who live and sort of work there. So how can we really harness that collective knowledge of worry and wisdom? Ushahidi is actually a Swahili word for witnessing or testimony. And in some ways, I think the commons map is an example. How do we witness what's going on with the water, right? If that woman who has a sort of generations of going down to the Grand River, she has a history and knowledge that sort of nobody else can sort of replace. And so when we give somebody the voice to sort of tell their story around water, then we also can give them some ownership of well, then how do you want to get involved? Versus let's let government take care of it, or let some other NGO sort of take care of it. I talked about text and context already. The mapping sort of visual is this idea of trying to get a bioregional perspective, not just the Ontario part of Ontario or the Michigan side of Michigan, but the whole thing. And people like Bob Lovelace and others talk about this idea of the re-indigenization of North America and the of our culture, of knowing what plants and animals, knowing where the water comes from, really trying to incorporate the idea of 7 generations in our thinking, and where is our identity sort of grounded. So what watershed do you live in? That kind of thing. Really, you have these little buttons and things what subway line is closest to your house. Spacing Magazine did that. Good stuff, right? This idea of supporting that. Whatever. Why don't we have buttons for which watershed you're in? How do we start creating a sort of culture of regionalization? Talked about place-based storytelling. community mapping is an interesting field. I know a bit about it from doing some research. And that is where you take this sort of mapping stuff offline. So in a space like this with tables and crayons and paper, we can actually draw maps and use maps as ways to facilitate knowledge, sharing, connecting, problem solving, and then we could transfer that same knowledge that's taking place offline, document it, put it on the Commons map, replicate that 1,000 times over around the Great Lakes, and then we can have such a rich amount of wisdom that we can all, again, share. And lastly, it's like the focus on the action is this idea of, again, capacity building between the different groups that are working on this, and the idea of naming what the Commons is. Potentially, the Commons map could be used to run campaigns, but I think that's further down the road in terms of like particular issue or events or whatever action we could harness the collective intelligence and the ownership of the map to support a certain campaign, let's say Line 9 or some new legislation for the Great Lakes or a political election or whatever. So lastly, here's sort of the offer, right? So those things I think I know that I've thought about, I'd love to get some sort of feedback on in terms of those critical tensions, the goals of the map, but then I really want to sort of hear from the crowd here, like, what do you think I need to know, ask, prepare, using your own experiences and what you're already doing, or even just based on the sort of quick orientation I've sort of done today. And so what I think I know, I need to think about more about is the idea of copyright and disclosure. So who owns the information? Do I own it? Does the organization sort of own it? Does the user own it? How is that sort of going to be used? And who has use of that? So can the government go to this website and say, oh, we consulted with the people, we went to the map, and we sort of saw what they said, and then we don't have to consult them in face to face. So I think just how they're going to use the information, that has to be really sort of spelled out somehow. We've got different groups with different agendas sharing information. Even groups that are like lefty, want to use the comments, okay, sure, but then share your information, right? So there's still this sort of cultural sort of like resistance to each different group that has their own funding, their own audience, their own ideas, of then letting that and sharing that to the larger whole. So trying to address that in a front-on sort of way. Identifying a clear motivation for both people and organizations to participate. Everyone's busy, everyone wants somebody else to do it, or it'll just get done, whatever. Well, how do you then create the motivation for actually sort of submitting your voice, be it data or a story or a link or whatever, an event, to a site to share that? Everyone likes when they get the benefits of the gift, but then it's like, well, now what's the reciprocal part of that in terms of the duty? So it's not easy. Developing the practice of the verb commenting. What is commenting? The art and the social practice of supporting and living out as a common sort of steward. What does that look like? How can we demonstrate that? How can we teach people about that? How can we hear from what they're already doing that demonstrates that, and document that, and share that, and model that? And then lastly, sort of packaging for funders. How can we talk about this as either digital literacy, or as a sort of water stewardship, or as a capacity building, yada, 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 for different funders down the road. So that's all I really I got some contact information there. But I would love to hear from the group here as a whole of what you think so far, any of these things that I think I know that you want to give me feedback on, or potentially on the right-hand side, more things to sort of think about.